Um, Deeyah, you were originally a very talented singer. You were trained by some of the, what we in Indian and Pakistani classical music call ustads, masters. And gradually you moved into what people would say pop music.
Cheesy,
yeah.
crappy pop music.
And in that process, you had a lot of threats as an artist. How old were you when you got the first threats?
Well, I personally didn't actually get the threats myself at the very beginning. It actually came to my father. We used to have, so I was born and raised in Oslo, and we used to have these delegations of men that would come to our house and would sit my father down and say, look, this is unacceptable. She's a girl. If this is a good family, then this is not something that she should be doing. My father, luckily, he's a very liberal man. He's a very eccentric man. He would always kick them out and say, it's my daughter, my problem, none of your business. And I think this started when I was maybe 9, 10 years old. They started going to him. Then they went to my grandfather, who's a very religious man, also in Norway. That didn't work. And then eventually when I was about 14, 15, they started coming to me. And then it escalated from there.
Is that a pattern that exists? You live in the UK now, and you stayed in many years in the US. That pattern of delegations, of people who feel they represent a particular group, would target families before they target the artists themselves?
I think for women, and if you're a young woman or a girl, I think that is quite common, because as a girl coming from the community and the background that I come from, even though I was born and raised in Norway, I don't necessarily have access to the same freedom as my white counterpart does. So in a way, as a girl, I'm the property of my family, first and foremost. So, and secondly, I'm the property, I'm sort of communal property. So the community, my parents' community, has more jurisdiction over my life, over my choices and my future and my dreams than even I do. And this is, not the reality in Afghanistan only, or in our parents' countries, but this is the reality here, inside our communities here as well. So in that sense, yes, it's not that strange for the disapproval to go to the family first.
Right.
But I'm lucky, my family actually, as I said, my father would send them away. For very many families, when reports like this of the bad behavior or unacceptable behavior of girls being reported back to families, many of the families choose the community and actually reject their own daughter. So I was very lucky in that sense that I got to hold my family still close.
Sometimes people will say, well, this is due to religion, and of course these days there's a lot of talk about Islam. In your view, how much is related to class structures, to cultural traditions? Or is it sort of a mixed bag of all these things, religion, culture, gender?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think, I think there is a mixture, but I do think that religion validates it. So I think religion ends up validating the discrimination against women. I think, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, when I was, again, 12, 13, 14 years old, and especially when I got 15, 16, 17, when I would be stopped in the streets of Oslo, what men would say to me when they spit in my face and would be yelling at me, one of the things that they would say is that it's un-Islamic for a woman to be participating in music. It's un-Islamic for a woman to be seen in the public space. It's un-Islamic for a woman to be participating at all on the public stage. So whether that's accurate or inaccurate, that's very much something that people who want to shut you up are using. So it becomes a reality anyway, in that sense.
No, it seems to, if you look historically, that after the 79 revolution in Iran, when Khomeini put out a fatwa against music, for a very short time, there was a total ban on music in Iran, except for military music, of course. I don't think any country ever banned military music for some strange reason. But this was a country which has a very, very strong musical heritage, cultural heritage, where people love to decorate houses and whatnot. And it seemed in that period that sort of inspiration from Wahhabi Islam, from Saudi Arabia, started seeping out. So again, this sort of fight between different groups of what is the right interpretation. I mean, we have had similar or parallel structures in our societies here. In the 18th century, we had some of the Christian missionaries traveling in Dalarna and other places and demanding the fiddle players to burn their instruments, which some of them did, because the fiddle was the tool of the devil. Only a few years ago, Marie Boine, the Norwegian Sami artist, started talking about how she grew up in a family where the yoik was totally banned. So whenever there was a yoik in the radio, her parents would turn the radio off because that was a big sin. So we actually have had that tradition of Nordic Talibans. And sometimes we forget that this clash, again, somehow shows a society that is diverse, but also sometimes diverse in a negative way, and where certain dominant groups decide that now is the time that we can forward our positions, which is exactly what happened with the Wahhabis, because there was the situation in Afghanistan where any enemy towards the Soviet Union was a friend, and in that period the Taliban was supported by the West financially. And the cultural effects of that were devastating in many ways in Pakistan.
I mean, my teachers, so I studied music from the age of 7. And as you said, my teachers were practitioners of North Indian and Pakistani classical music, but all my teachers were incredibly devout Muslims. So not only would they teach me about music, but they would also speak about spirituality, they would also speak about the religion. So on one hand, I was taught by extremely religious men who for them, music was one of the ways of connecting with God. Right. And then on the streets of Oslo, by other Muslim men, I was being told that this is completely unacceptable, completely un-Islamic. So I agree with you that there's not a black and white, this is what is permissible, this is what's not permissible. I think the Muslim majority world, in a way, has had a tremendously rich artistic, musical heritage. And quite honestly, it's every single society now, Muslim society, whenever they're called to prayer, they're called to prayer through singing.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's music is actually a very deep and essential part of life and of what it means to be a human being in most of our communities and most of our parents' original countries as well. So I agree with you. I think in the last 30 to 40 years, this Wahhabi brand of Islam, that's a very, very rigid, intolerant, unhuman brand of Islam, is destroying women, it's destroying art, it's destroying culture, it's destroying diversity. We're speaking about diversity today. This brand is exterminating diversity in every expression possible.
And again, I mean, historically we had also these directions in Christianity where suddenly all churches were whitewashed because you were not supposed to have any images. And I remember a couple of years ago we were running a workshop with 12 different Muslim musicians who live in Europe. And one of them said, well, suddenly my father said that I couldn't perform, and that's due to my religion. And I said, I'm not really sure that is what it's about, because there was a period in bourgeois Europe where every good girl should learn to play piano. Maybe not so today. But once you got the idea of going on a stage, that's where the family said, no, You cannot go on stage. You know, that's below our class. Yeah. So there's also this sort of, what is the status of the artist in many countries? And in many countries, of course, the status of the artist is really very low. Yeah. So there are many issues here to tackle, but how to challenge that in reality? You know, because this happens every day, that someone will come and say, you shouldn't do this because of this or this and that. How can that be challenged, for instance, in school systems? And because if a child comes up and say, according to my religion, I cannot take part in music education, how is the system going to address this?
I think the system has to decide what it wants to accomplish. I think the system has to decide that diversity means diversity. It means the expression of diversity, but it also means the access of everyone, all of our children in our society, to be able to participate in what's on offer in terms of education or in terms of culture. I'm very against any kind of segregation. To me, you know, we use all these words, diversity, integration, all these type of things, but to me, we have to figure out what that really means. And to me, creating more and more reasons for our young people to become separate from each other is not something that should be supported. I think what should be encouraged and facilitated as much as possible is coming together, bridging, connecting, and I think music or any kind of art education, I think, is a very interesting and a very useful, sports as well, very good way of accomplishing that. So I think when children are being pulled out from participating in music, me personally, I would not accept that. If I was the teacher of that child, I would talk to the parents. I would not let that child be separated from the rest of the group. I would fight and do everything in my power to make sure that that child gets to learn and connect with the rest of the children through that.
Right. Before we move into the second part of this, we're talking a little bit about your work.
Can I just say something? You know, because the thing is, what are we willing to tolerate in a way? You know, the reason we would accept that answer is because the parents or the parents' community are saying that. But who is our responsibility? Is our responsibility what somebody's parents wants, or is our responsibility the child and the best for the child? You know, we have practices in our communities like female genital mutilation, or early child marriage, and you know, certain type of violence against women that's sanctioned by some of our communities and their leaders and even our parents. So the rest of society, should we say, great, I have no responsibility, it's her culture, it's her religion, so let her be abused, let her be taken away, let her get married at whatever age, let her not participate. I think, again, we have to decide who we are, what we stand for, and then we have to ensure that all of our children in our society have access to the same rights, the same protections, and the same opportunities as anybody else. So that means when their parents choose to separate them out, then the rest of society has to sort of step in and say, well, it's not just your child, it's also our child.
Right. Susanna, could I get you to prepare for the Banas video? I mean, this could lead to a long discussion on cultural relativism. It's an old big discussion. But before we move, just wait a minute. Are there any comments, questions at this stage? Because then we're not going to end with 2 minutes of questions and answers. There may be something one of you or two of you might want to say at this stage. Anyone? Yes, please. You're already being stopped before you start.
Yeah, they're censoring you already.
But here comes the microphone. And could you just say who you are?
Well, there's the saying, a child is not just the family.
Could you say who you are?
It's the child is the whole village child.
So could you say who you are?
My name is Erica Wasserman. I'm a film producer.
Thank you.
But I worked in Africa and Asia with questions, in minority questions. But I think it's just important to highlight that it's a question of working with communities and not ostracizing communities, that it's not just the parent, it's the community, maybe the religious leaders, that their part and the schools and religious communities have a bond and they can work together with these questions.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Come on, come on.
Yes, please. Up the microphone up here on the third row to my right hand, third chair.
My name is Ida Burén. I'm working at Dansens Hus with dance. But I have a question. I've had it in my mind since Alice Bah Kuhnke was speaking, because I see a mix. If you could maybe bring it in the afternoon also in the continuous talks, that we are here talking about culture, but actually in many ways ethnicity, the word was
Don't get me going.
no, in some political discussions,
Yeah.
at least, and also in medial opinion, almost journalist or medial discussions, I see now that often actually the word of ethnicity is replaced with culture.
Right.
And I think for me at least it's a bit new, and just I want to bring in that when are we actually talking about art and culture, and when are we actually talking about ethnicity and culture?
Right. Well, I mean, you get me started. I'll do it brief. I hate the word ethnicity. I don't know what it is actually. Am I an ethnic Dane? What is an ethnic Dane? How does an ethnic Dane look like? What is an ethnic Pakistani? Is it a Baluchi? Is it a man from Punjab? But we use it in a way, or misuse the word ethnicity, and it's also being misused by certain groups who say, we come from a specific ethnic group. I mean, anyone who's studied migration knows that are there any really Aboriginals left in the earth? But when it becomes a tool in culture politics and saying, we are an ethnic group, and then we have special rights, does it mean that it's confined into certain expressions? Does an Indian from Peru has to stick to playing El Condapasa? Or can he actually play football or read Italian literature? It's a very, very tricky issue. But I won't continue. Maybe you have a short comment on that.
No, I don't.
No, fine.
Short.
Okay.
Can I say something
Yes.
about the religious leaders?
Sure.
It depends what the goal is. If the goal is to bring, actually, what is the goal? Can I just, because I want to be very clear. What do you mean that we have to engage with communities and religious leaders? In the context of what's best for children, or best for women, or?
Well, in order to have the religious leaders backing you in getting the child to enjoy music and expressing themselves through different cultural means,
I see.
They should not feel threatened. So that's basically
Yeah.
it. Just making sure that they don't have a reason to feel threatened.
Yeah,
So that's my comment.
yes, I completely agree. I think that's the ideal. I think if we can get religious leaders to do their job and actually be supportive of all individuals in their communities, including women and not just men, I think that would be the ideal. I think from the reality of it, I don't see that happening a lot. And I think the danger of engaging with groups and representatives of groups, I think we end up failing the individual. So I think a safer policy is to ensure that all individuals in our communities, in our society, in our countries, are taken care of and are respected and are valued and supported in the way that they need to be. And I think that way we will handle the group. But I think it's very, very, very dangerous to outsource the responsibility of certain types of people and hand the keys over to a religious man or to a self-appointed community leader. But I do think that there is value of finding positive religious leaders who are able to speak to the liberation and inclusion of all citizens. But finding those guys is, we don't have that much time. We can't afford to lose children while we find them. But I think that as an ideal, we should aspire to that. But on a practical level, I think we have to just focus on the individuals for now. Does that make sense?
No, I mean, it's a very complex issue. I just think
It
we
is.
should have both these
We should, but I
goals.
don't, definitely
so
we
all
should have both.
work together for this.
I agree, but I also think that interfaith dialogue, for example, and engaging with religious leaders, I think that has its place and should be confined to religious questions. I think the practical everyday life of our children, I think, is something else. I have to say...
Absolutely agree.
And in the West in particular, I have to be completely honest, but you know, self-appointed male community leaders and religious leaders have done more to maintain the status quo and more to sort of guard orthodoxy than to think of the well-being of women, than to think of the well-being of children. In their communities.
I mean, there, you know, research where if you really...
I think maybe I have to move on here.
This is very interesting, though.
But we can
later.
continue out there because it's a very essential discussion.
Yeah.
But I have to sort of wrap very briefly. After all the threats, all the attacks you had, you decided to leave Norway when you were 17.
Yeah.
Get out of the place. And like any other artist that were threatened, and being so young was quite a shock.
It was devastating, yeah.
We can talk about that a little bit more in the afternoon. But what happened, and then we go several years onwards, you came back not as a singer, but as a filmmaker. Let's just have a short clip here.
I'm wondering if you want to speak. Who killed Banaz? You're innocent, then who killed Banaz? Who killed Banaz?
People following me, or somehow they follow me. Anytime, if anything happens to me, it's them.
They killed her there just for being in love. I mean, sometimes I'm thinking why love should be so hated.
If she was in my life would be orange and yellow.
Honor killing, obviously it's been a big topic in Sweden as well. You made a film about it. Not only your first film, you even got an Emmy Award for that. You're welcome.
Yeah, very polite.
I love techniques. It must have been a very difficult film to make.
It was.
Also emotionally. Because it touches very much on those issues here. We often talk about artists self-centering themselves. Did you have any sort of considerations? Well, of course you did. But what were the considerations when you were making the film about what would you put in it or what would you not put in it? And why wouldn't you put certain things in and how would it be interpreted?
I mean, again, coming from a minority, growing up in a predominantly white country, there's a lot of negotiations you have to do as an artist. There's a lot of calculations and a lot of math in a way you do yourself. Everything from, if I speak about the challenges and the ugliness within the baggage that our parents have brought to these countries, if I'm honest about that, if I really speak out about that, will I be handing ammunition to racists, for example? So that's a calculation you constantly have to do. And then on the other hand, I had to think about, but if I think about the racists and what they're going to say and that it might become a political football for them, what should I do then? Should I remain silent? So then you think, well, if I remain silent, the price of silence is so great. The price of our silence, my silence, is that our kids, our young people and women like this are dying. And nobody's willing to speak about them. Nobody's willing to say anything about them. Their own communities won't say anything. Their own parents don't want to say anything because they're the ones who've done this. So then the rest of us, if we sit down, and me, and I feel, and I just want to be polite because I want everyone to get along, then you also realize, well, but that's not a true relationship between people. A true relationship between people is honesty. Honesty and celebration about all the positive and all the beauty that our parents have brought with them. But an honest relationship is also about acknowledging and looking at the ugliness and staying with each other through it and supporting each other through it. So, and as an artist, it's very, very hard. And then you also think about, you know, then you've got the commercial side of things. You know, you don't want to end up becoming... For me, it was so hard. I made the film completely independently, but it ended up on national TV. But my biggest fear was if any TV channel or anyone like that gets involved too soon, maybe they won't understand the complexity of the story. Maybe they will simplify it and flatten it and just make it about victims and villains and good people, bad people, rather than complicated human beings going through difficult life and making very, very devastating, deadly mistakes, but people nonetheless. So for me, the decision that I've come, so there's all this stuff that goes, and then the other added factor is you think about, well, can that put me in danger? If I say this, will I get shot? If I say, you know, there were lots of reports about family members of this young woman who were, you know, I don't know if, I mean, this is being recorded, so I don't know if I should be saying it, but, you know, who were threatening women who were speaking out about this case. So then I had to factor that in too. Should I say it? Should it not say it? But to me, the result that I landed at was I've spent a lot of my life being afraid. I've spent a lot of my life being careful and a lot of my life considering everyone else's feelings rather than my own and rather than the truth. So the conclusion I came to is, doesn't matter how unpleasant it is, doesn't matter how ugly it is, I just have to stick to the truth and I have to stick to the reality of what happened to this young woman. Because if I don't, our women will continue to be exterminated. And we will be standing by in silence. We can pat ourselves on the back saying, well, but we're very polite. We're not racist, you know. But it is racist to allow for this to happen to our women. It is racist to say that somehow women who look like this don't matter as much and that we should be much more careful.
Early today, we heard this. How do we deal with these threats in our societies? As I understand, this film is now being used by police authorities in the UK.
Yeah, it's being used by schools, police, and a lot of other frontline services. That's actually why I made it. I didn't make it because I thought really anybody would see it. I made it because I wanted it to be an educational tool for people who are on the front lines, able to support young women. I want them to understand what the problems are, how they should recognize these problems, and how they should prevent them from happening in the future. So schools, social services, police, obviously, health services. So a lot of them are now actually using it as part of their training. Because this woman, she was killed by her family because she fell in love with someone and she left a very violent marriage. But she'd also gone to the police in England 5 times saying, this is going to happen to me. And nobody did anything because they didn't believe her. They didn't believe that you can get killed for this. So she was.
We have just 3-4 minutes left in this session. Deeyah will be back in the afternoon. The new film you have came out last year, Jihad.
Yeah.
Your first film, no one in the established industry expected it to become a success, and then it got the most prestigious award in the world. So everyone's surprised, and no surprise, the industry then wanted you to do another film. And you had some discussions with the television company about how that should be made.
Well, I decided, because of the success of the first film, you know, more people were interested in what I was doing. But it was, again, I wanted to pick a topic that I'm obsessed by, which is why our young people in the West are becoming radicalized, why they are going towards violent jihad, what's really happening. So I wanted to understand that more. It's also out of selfish reasons, because I need this movement to stop. Because if they don't stop, not only are we losing our kids to it, but we will lose a lot of women. We have been losing a lot of women as a result of it. So I wanted to understand what's going on, but it's such an infected topic. It's such a difficult topic now that to touch it with any sense of humanity is very, very difficult. So I actually made a lot of calculations again in my mind and decided to make the film independently and make all the creative decisions myself, and then for this broadcaster to actually show it. And to my surprise, the television company in the UK, television channel who ended up working with me, didn't touch anything. They completely let me make the film that I wanted to make and ask the questions that I wanted to ask.
Because industrial interference is, of course, also another issue. We'll finish this session just with a small trailer, and we can come back to it in the afternoon. So thank you now, Deeyah. We'll come back in the afternoon. And can we have the trailer?